At my daughter's wedding, her fiancé emptied a bucket of garbage over me. He yelled at me, claiming it was the soup I had requested as a beggar. I was full of rage, but I simply stood there silently, covered in the trash. Then, a person among the guests shouted that I was a billionaire. My soon-to-be son-in-law's face went completely pale, and you would never believe what he did next. The Singapore deal was collapsing, and I had 30 minutes to save $15 million. My hands trembled as I managed 3 different phones, and papers were scattered across my mahogany desk like fallen leaves. My coffee had been cold for hours, but the caffeine was still buzzing in my veins. When my personal phone lit up with my daughter's name, I almost let it go to voicemail. Business was always my priority. But then, a sudden wave of guilt washed over me. My daughter, Chloe, rarely called during work hours. She sounded breathless with excitement, telling me she had the most incredible news. She said she was engaged and that her boyfriend, David, had proposed to her last night at an amazing little restaurant in Hoboken. She said it was absolutely perfect. The contract in my hand suddenly felt weightless. I was so shocked that the word engaged came out sounding strangled. I asked her when it happened, and she explained that it had been the previous night. She said she had wanted to call me right away, but it was so late that she knew I would worry if she called past midnight. She told me David was amazing, funny, and charming, and that he had a way of making her feel like she was the only person in the room. My business instincts, honed over 25 years, screamed a warning. A fast proposal, empty charm, and making someone feel special were all classic manipulation tactics. I forced a warm tone into my voice and asked her to tell me about him, requesting his full name again. She replied that his name was David Harrove, and that he worked in marketing in New Jersey. She thought he was so ambitious and that he talked about expanding into New York and maybe even starting his own firm someday. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I looked up David Harrove. His LinkedIn profile was basic and generic. There were a few photos from company events and a standard corporate headshot, but nothing substantial. For someone supposedly ambitious, his digital footprint was remarkably small. Chloe noticed my silence and asked if I was still there. I apologized and said I was just processing the big news. I scrolled through more search results, finding nothing. He was either incredibly private or incredibly unremarkable. I told her I would love to meet him. She said that was the reason she was calling. He wanted to have dinner with me the next night, and his parents would be there too. I told her that was perfect and that I would be honored, but I needed to ask her for a favor. She said she would do anything. I carefully chose my words, telling her not to mention my specific line of work. I explained that I would prefer to get to know them without any complications. She laughed, that musical sound that had brightened my world for 26 years, and said she understood. She told me I wanted them to like me for me, not for my money, and that she would just say I worked in renewable energy. She was a smart girl who understood my concern about a gold digger without me having to say it directly. I thanked her and told her to text me the details. She told me she loved me and that I was going to adore him. She promised. The line went dead. I stared at David's LinkedIn photo. He had a cocky smile, an expensive haircut, and eyes that didn't quite match his grin. Every paternal alarm bell in my head was ringing. My assistant knocked and told me Singapore was on the line. I glanced at the contracts and then back at the screen. It was $15 million versus my daughter's happiness. There was no contest. I told my assistant I would call them back in an hour. After 26 years of protecting her, some smooth-talking stranger thought he could just waltz into her life. I enlarged the photo, studying every detail. I told myself that tomorrow night, I would find out what kind of man my daughter had chosen. I wondered if he would pass the test that he didn't even know he was taking. David's face faded from my screen as my eyes shifted to the silver frame on my desk. My late wife, Jennifer, smiled back at me. She was frozen in time, at 24 years old, radiant in her wedding dress, completely unaware that she had less than 3 years left. The hospital had smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. I had held Chloe for the first time while Jennifer's hand grew cold in mine, her wedding ring still warm against my palm. That ring now sat in my safe at home, but its weight had never left my finger. I remembered whispering a promise to my tiny, wrinkled baby. I would protect her from everything. I soon realized that everything was a lot. There were 3 a.m. feedings while I read business plans by lamplight. Chloe's first words were not "mama" or "dada," but "dada work." which she said from her high chair while I typed furiously on my laptop. I was trying to secure our future with one hand while spooning mashed carrots with the other. Babysitters quit faster than I could hire them. My schedule was pure chaos. I had investor meetings at dawn, conference calls during nap time, and product development sessions that stretched until midnight. I built NextGen Renewables from our garage while Chloe napped in her carrier, her tiny fist often wrapped around my thumb as I sketched solar panel designs. When she was 5, she quietly asked me why I worked so much while coloring beside my desk as I finalized our first $1 million contract. The irony was not lost on me. I was building an empire to protect her, but she was growing up watching me disappear into that very empire. The teenage years brought rebellion. She screamed at me after I had quietly investigated her junior prom date. She said I didn't trust anyone and that I thought everyone was trying to use her. She was not wrong. I had seen too many men circle wealth like sharks, all smiles and charm until they got what they wanted. I had taught her to recognize the signs. They would show too much interest in where we lived, ask questions about my business, or suddenly be available whenever she mentioned expensive restaurants. But I had also taught her to be independent. She chose to attend college at Berkeley to study environmental science because she genuinely cared about it, not because it was connected to my business. Her job at EcoThrive barely paid enough for her Brooklyn apartment, but she had refused my offers to help with the rent. She told me she needed to know she could make it on her own. Now she was 26, brilliant, kind, and trusting. She was everything Jennifer had been. She was everything I had tried to preserve while the world tried to corrupt it. My phone alarm chimed, reminding me it was 8:15 p.m. My dinner plans for tomorrow needed real preparation. I closed my laptop and looked out at the San Francisco skyline, with its lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. Somewhere out there in a thrift store or a discount retailer was the costume I would need for tomorrow night's performance. I knew that if David Harrove thought he could charm his way into my daughter's life without proving his worth, he was about to learn otherwise. I had spent decades protecting Chloe from wolves in sheep's clothing. Tomorrow, I would find out if her fiancé was a wolf or a shepherd. The test was about to begin. My alarm screamed at 6:30 a.m., but I had been awake for an hour, staring at the ceiling of my deliberately modest bedroom. Today, John Whitaker, the billionaire CEO, would disappear, and in his place, a middle-class father would emerge. I rolled out of bed and looked at my San Francisco apartment, which was 200 square feet of carefully curated normalcy. The Italian espresso machine gleamed next to a chipped ceramic mug from a gas station. My authentic thrift store furniture sat beside genuine vintage pieces I had found at estate sales. Even my deception had to have layers. In my closet, I pushed past hand-tailored suits that were worth more than most people's cars. Behind them hung my real disguise: worn jeans, faded polo shirts, and scuffed sneakers. I had practiced this transformation before during undercover market research for my company. It was amazing how differently people treated you when you looked ordinary. But tonight required more than casual clothes. I needed a complete costume. The thrift store, Second Chances, was wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing place on Mission Street. It was perfect. The elderly clerk looked up from her romance novel as I entered, and bells jangled overhead. She asked me if she could help me find something. I told her I needed an outfit for a job interview, affecting slight embarrassment as I said I had been out of work for a while. I told her I needed to look respectable but couldn't afford much. Her face softened with genuine sympathy. She told me they had some nice pieces in the back and asked me what size I was. 20 minutes later, I had assembled my disguise. It was a navy suit with slightly worn elbows, a polyester blend that had seen better decades, and scuffed black shoes that pinched my feet. There was also a tie with a pattern that screamed, "Trying too hard on a budget." The clerk beamed, telling me the jacket was perfect on me and made me look distinguished. She told me that any employer would be lucky to have me. I thought about the irony of her dressing a man worth $1.5 billion. I thanked her and told her this meant everything. The total came to $18.43, and I paid in exact change using small, carefully counted bills. The clerk's encouraging smile nearly broke my heart. Back home, I practiced my new persona in the mirror. I hunched my shoulders slightly, as if confidence was something I couldn't afford. My voice was softer and less authoritative, and my hands were clasped rather than commanding. I Googled the average salary for a renewable energy consultant in Northern California, $65,000 annually. It was comfortable, but not wealthy. Perfect. My rental car arrived at noon. It was a 6-year-old Honda Civic with a coffee stain on the passenger seat. I had specifically requested their most ordinary vehicle, leaving my Tesla in my garage. I did one final check. I was wearing a cheap Timex instead of my Rolex, and my wallet had carefully arranged credit cards showing modest limits. I also had a few family photos that painted the picture of a loving but financially stretched single father. I looked in the mirror one last time. John Whitaker, environmental consultant and devoted dad, was ready to meet his daughter's fiancé. The drive to New Jersey would take 5 hours. 5 hours to mentally prepare for the performance of my life. Chloe's happiness was on the line, and I would not let some charming opportunist destroy what Jennifer and I had built. I started the engine, practiced my opening lines one more time, and pulled into traffic. I knew that by the end of tonight, I would know if this man deserved my daughter or if I would have to find a way to open her eyes without breaking her heart. The test was about to begin. The Honda Civic's engine ticked as it cooled in the parking lot of Bella Vista. 6 hours of driving had left my lower back aching, but the real discomfort came from what lay ahead. Through the restaurant's windows, I could see warm lighting and couples sharing wine, normal people living normal lives. I adjusted my polyester tie one final time and checked my reflection in the side mirror. The man staring back looked tired and slightly overwhelmed, which was exactly what I was going for. John Whitaker, humble consultant, was ready to meet his daughter's future in-laws. The hostess barely glanced at me when I approached and asked me if I needed a table for one. I told her I was meeting the Harrove party and that there should be 5 of us. Her expression shifted to polite interest. She said they had just called and were running a few minutes late. I followed her to a corner booth and slid into the worn vinyl seat. The menu prices made me wince theatrically, adding another layer to my performance. A Caesar salad for $18 seemed high, as I had spent more than that on a single cup of coffee that morning. Then, Chloe burst through the entrance like sunshine. Her joy was infectious even in my nervous state. Behind her came a man who had to be David. His hair was styled perfectly, and his walk was confident. An expensive watch glimmered on his wrist under the restaurant's lights. His parents, Vance and Maris, flanked him like bodyguards. Chloe beamed as they approached, introducing me to everyone. She said I was her father and that the people with David were his parents. David's handshake was firm, but his eyes were quickly assessing my cheap suit, scuffed shoes, and nervous smile. The corner of his mouth twitched upward slightly. He said I must be the famous father-in-law, and that Chloe had told him so much about me. His tone was just condescending enough to sting. He said he loved the vintage look I had going on. Vance's handshake nearly crushed my fingers, a dominance test I had encountered 1,000 times in boardrooms. He asked me what line of work kept me busy. I shrugged apologetically and told him I was a small renewable energy consultant, nothing too exciting. I said I was just trying to make ends meet while doing something meaningful. Maris's smile was razor-sharp. She said my work was noble, adding that not everyone could afford to work for a cause instead of for profit. The waiter arrived with a poised pen, but David didn't even let me speak. He said I would have the minestrone soup, something easy on the wallet. He then winked at Chloe. He told me not to worry about dinner tonight because it was his treat. Every part of me wanted to order the most expensive item on the menu and pay for everyone's meal with the change in my pocket. Instead, I forced gratitude into my voice and told him that was very generous of him and that I appreciated it. The conversation that followed felt like acid flowing around me. They made subtle digs disguised as concern and told jokes at my expense that made Chloe shift uncomfortably. David entertained the table with stories of his marketing successes, each one carefully designed to highlight my comparative failure. He told Chloe, loud enough for me to hear, that her father seemed so practical and that it was refreshing to meet someone so grounded in reality. Maris nodded sagely and added that, salt of the earth, people were so important because they kept the rest of us humble. I caught Chloe's eye across the table. She looked mortified but felt trapped, trying to salvage an evening that was disintegrating by the minute. My daughter's happiness was on the line, and these people were treating me like a charity case. My soup arrived lukewarm and oversalted. I ate it with apparent gratitude while David described his plans to help Chloe manage her finances after they were married. He chuckled and said she was so idealistic, working at a little nonprofit instead of somewhere profitable, but that he would straighten her out. That was when I knew, without a single doubt, that this man saw my daughter as a project to be improved, not a person to be cherished. When the check came, David made a grand show of paying for it, loudly discussing the tip percentage while I sat silently. Outside, I grabbed Chloe's arm. The parking lot felt like a stage under the fluorescent lights. The cool April air carried the scent of rain, and I could hear David's voice drifting from his car where his parents were clustered around him like courtiers. Chloe's face was already defensive. I kept my voice gentle but direct as I asked her how long she had really known David. She said they had been together for 6 months, and that she knew it wasn't long enough, but that she knew what she felt. I asked her if she had noticed how he spoke to the waiter tonight, or how he had ordered for me without asking. Her jaw tightened, and she said he was just being protective and didn't want me to feel pressured about money. I touched her shoulder and said I had been around long enough to recognize condescension when I heard it. I told her I had seen how truly good men behaved and asked her what she thought of tonight. She stepped back, and her eyes flashed. She said he had paid for dinner and that he was being generous. I told her that he had been performing generosity and that there was a difference. The words hit me like physical blows as she said I was working all the time, never dating anyone, and never letting anyone get close enough to hurt me. I told her that was not fair, and she replied that maybe it wasn't fair, but it was true. She said I just couldn't stand that she was choosing her own life instead of staying safely in my protective bubble. Her voice had risen just enough that David glanced over, smirking. The sight of his satisfaction made my stomach clench. I told her quietly that I was scared she was choosing someone who didn't see her worth. She said that maybe that was her mistake to make, and that maybe she needed to learn her own lessons instead of living in fear of everything that might go wrong. The parking lot fell silent, with only the sound of distant traffic. My daughter stood before me, beautiful and stubborn and absolutely convinced she was right, just as her mother had been at that age. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her resistance melt into reluctant acceptance. I told her that if he made her truly happy, then I would support her decision, and the words tasted like ashes. I told her I loved her more than my own opinions. She sounded surprised and asked if I really meant that. I lied and said I did. I told her I just wanted her to be sure, and she said she really was. She hugged me tighter, and I memorized the moment. It was my little girl choosing her own path, even if it led toward a cliff I could see, but she couldn't. We walked back toward the cars, her hand in mine. David straightened as we approached, with that familiar smirk on his lips. He asked if everything was okay, and that we had looked pretty serious. I replied evenly that it was just father-daughter bonding and that we were getting to know each other's perspectives. He said that's what family was for, and that he was sure we would all get along great once I saw how much he cared about Chloe. I nodded, shaking hands all around, playing my part to perfection. But as I watched my daughter drive away with this man who saw her as a possession to be managed, I made a silent vow. The wedding would be my final chance. It would be one last test to either prove what I already knew or give him an opportunity to surprise me. The drive back to my hotel stretched ahead like a prison sentence. 3 months passed like a fever dream. Chloe's weekly calls bubbled with wedding excitement over centerpieces and string quartets and cake tastings that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Each conversation felt like a countdown to disaster. July 15th arrived with a press of heat and a stack of mail I had been avoiding. There were bills from companies I barely noticed anymore and charity requests I could fund with a phone call. And then there was a cream-colored card that made my chest tighten. The invitation was everything I had expected: expensive paper, gold lettering, and formal language that screamed old money pretense. I immediately looked up the venue, Willow Grove Estate. It was at least $50,000 for a wedding venue. The photos showed manicured gardens and a ballroom that could host corporate galas, a place far beyond what a marketing manager and his logistics coordinator father could afford. This suggested they were gambling everything on this wedding, banking on family connections to justify the expense. My phone buzzed with a message from my executive assistant asking me if he should book first class for my August 3rd flight to New Jersey. I told him to book me a coach ticket, something modest, and to clear my calendar for the weekend. There was a pause before he reminded me that the quarterly board meeting was scheduled for Monday. I told him to reschedule it because my family came first. I hung up and walked to my closet, pushing past suits that cost more than luxury cars. In the back, wrapped in plastic like a shrine to deception, hung my thrift store costume. The navy jacket with its slightly shiny lapels and the polyester pants that never quite fit right. 3 months ago, this had been a test. Now, it felt like armor. I tried it on, checking my reflection for changes. The stress of watching my daughter plan her future destruction had carved new lines around my eyes, but the suit still fit. It still made me look like exactly what I was pretending to be, a man scraping by, doing his best, completely outclassed by his daughter's new social circle. My laptop chimed with a Google alert I had set months ago. David Harrove, New Jersey. Still nothing substantial, no major achievements, and no notable failures. Just a man coasting through life on charm and other people's expectations. The wedding was in 18 days. 18 days to watch my daughter promise her life to someone who saw her as a stepping stone to better things. I wondered if he could prove me wrong. I wondered if he would show actual kindness instead of performed generosity when faced with someone he thought was beneath him. I wondered if the man my daughter loved was hiding somewhere beneath his smug surface. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Chloe's contact. Her latest text was a photo of bridesmaid dresses, accompanied by heart emojis and exclamation points. It was pure joy radiating from the screen. My finger hovered over the call button. One word from me could shatter this happiness. One conversation about prenups, background checks, and trust funds could wake her up to realities she wasn't ready to face. Instead, I typed back that they were beautiful and that I couldn't wait to see her walk down the aisle. Her response came immediately. She said she loved me and asked me if I was going to cry. I replied that I probably would, but not for the reason she thought. I closed the laptop and packed my modest suitcase, folding the cheap suit carefully between layers of equally unremarkable clothes. Tomorrow, I would fly coach to New Jersey and check into a budget hotel. I would play my part one final time. Maybe, just maybe, David Harrove would surprise us both. The suitcase zipper closed with finality, sealing my costume inside. In the bedroom mirror, my reflection showed a successful man preparing to pretend to be poor. It was time to find out if love could triumph over greed, or if I would have to watch my daughter learn the hardest lesson of all. BMW sedans and Mercedes coupes stretched across the Willow Grove estate parking lot like a luxury car showroom. My Honda Civic looked pathetic among them, which was exactly the effect I had intended. It was 11:45, and the wedding guests were already arriving in designer outfits that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. I sat in the rental car for a moment, adjusting my thrift store suit one final time. The navy jacket was tight across my shoulders, and the polyester fabric made me sweat under the August sun. Perfect. I picked up the small gift bag from the passenger seat, a modest picture frame from Target, wrapped in generic paper. The estate's white columns gleamed against manicured lawns. Elderly women in Chanel suits glided past, while men in custom tailoring checked their expensive watches. I walked through them like a ghost, invisible until someone needed to step around my cheaper presents. A silver-haired woman in pearls, who had noticed my hesitation near the guest seating area, asked me if I was looking for someone. Her tone suggested I might be lost. I quietly told her I was the bride's father. Her face shifted through surprise and confusion before she recovered and politely said that was wonderful and that I must be so proud today. The ceremony space hummed with quiet conversations and rustling silk. I found a seat in the back row behind families I didn't recognize. Around me, guests whispered about stock portfolios and European vacations while I studied the ornate decorations that probably cost more than my fake annual salary. At exactly noon, the string quartet began to play Pachelbel's Canon, and the guests rose in one elegant wave. Then I saw her. Chloe floated down the aisle in ivory silk that caught the sunlight like spun gold. My throat closed as memories flooded back. Teaching her to ride a bicycle, helping with calculus homework, and watching her graduate from college. Jennifer should have been there to see that moment. David stood at the altar in a tuxedo that fit like it was sewn onto his body. His smile was confident and proprietary as he watched his prize approach. When Chloe reached him, he took her hands with a theatrical tenderness that made my stomach turn. The ceremony blurred past in a haze of traditional vows and camera flashes. I watched my daughter promise her life to a man who would destroy her happiness, and all I could do was smile and applaud with everyone else. Blaine's kiss lasted exactly long enough for the photographer to capture multiple angles. Even that intimate moment was a performance for an audience. As guests moved toward the reception area, I lingered near the back. The wedding planner, a thin woman with a clipboard, approached with purpose and asked if I was looking for the service entrance and that the kitchen staff gathering was around back. I patiently told her I was a guest and that I was Chloe's father. She blinked twice, consulting her clipboard as if it might explain my presence. She apologized and said the cocktail hour was beginning in the garden. I walked toward the reception tent, past groups of guests who glanced at me curiously before returning to their conversations. A bartender in a crisp white jacket offered champagne from a silver tray. I accepted a glass and found a corner where I could observe without disrupting the social choreography. Blaine was already holding court near the head table, gesturing dramatically while telling a story that had his groomsmen laughing. When he spotted me across the tent, his expression shifted to theatrical warmth. He announced to everyone that they should meet his new father-in-law. He then asked, "John works in what was it again?" Every face turned toward me. I raised my champagne glass slightly and told them I worked in renewable energy consulting and that it was a small operation. Blaine announced to the crowd that it was very grassroots work and so important. The condescension dripped like honey. A few guests nodded politely, then immediately lost interest when they realized I wasn't anyone worth knowing. Dinner service began with salmon and asparagus that would have been delicious if I could have tasted anything past the growing knot in my stomach. The final test was coming. Everything depended on the next hour. I set down my fork and walked toward Blaine's table. Blaine was in the middle of a sentence about his bachelor party in Atlantic City when I approached the head table. 6 groomsmen leaned in, hanging on his every word, while bridesmaids picked at their salads and pretended to find his stories charming. I apologized for interrupting and asked if I could speak with him for a moment. His laugh stopped abruptly. The entire table went silent, and 14 pairs of eyes shifted between us like spectators at a tennis match. He stood with exaggerated courtesy and a hand on my shoulder, as if we were old friends. He told everyone to give us a second for family business. Nervous laughter rippled around the table, and I could feel other guests at nearby tables turning to watch. Perfect. I kept my voice humble and slightly embarrassed as I told him I hated to ask this, but I was having some stomach trouble and wondered if it would be possible to get a simple bowl of soup. I added that I knew it was strange, but that rich food hadn't been agreeing with me lately, and that maybe something from the kitchen would work. Blaine's eyebrows shot up. He said, "Soup at a reception?" and called the request unusual. I knew he was calculating his response, weighing the request against the audience watching. This was his chance to appear magnanimous while emphasizing my limitations. He said he supposed they could accommodate our budget-conscious guest, and that he would see what he could arrange. Vance leaned over from his seat and stage whispered to his wife, "He can't even handle normal food." Maris added that some people just didn't know reception etiquette. A bridesmaid with kind eyes looked concerned. A groomsman, with a smirk, added that maybe I was on medication or just used to different dining situations. Blaine basked in the attention, playing the role of the generous host dealing with a difficult relative. He said not to worry about anything and that he would take care of everything because that was what family did. He patted my shoulder, and I had to resist the urge to break his fingers. Instead, I smiled gratefully and told him I really appreciated his understanding. He said, "We're family now. Can't have you feeling uncomfortable at your own daughter's wedding." I returned to my table, and whispers followed in my wake. The story was already spreading. The bride's poor father, who couldn't handle proper food, needed special accommodations and didn't understand how these events worked. 45 minutes passed, then an hour. I watched the main course come and go, while my stomach genuinely began to ache, though not from hunger. Chloe glanced over several times, her brow furrowed with concern. After 90 minutes had elapsed, I approached Blaine again. He was deep in conversation with his groomsmen about some business deal, gesturing with a wine glass. I asked if he had managed to arrange the soup. He looked up as if surprised to see me. He said, "Soup? Oh, right. You're a situation." He set down his wine and stood slowly, with that peculiar smile on his lips. He said, "Absolutely. I made sure to get you exactly what you deserve." A cold feeling came over me. The way he said deserve had a weight that had nothing to do with soup. I told him that was very kind of him. He said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear that kindness should go to people who actually deserved it. He excused himself from the table with a theatrical flourish, saying, "I'll check on that right now. Don't go anywhere." The groomsman chuckled as he walked toward the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, watching him disappear through the service doors, every instinct screaming that something terrible was about to happen. But I needed this. Chloe needed to see who she had married. I returned to my table and waited for the show to begin. At exactly 3 p.m., the reception had hit its peak energy. Guests were relaxed from the champagne. Conversations were flowing, and the dance floor was beginning to beckon. I stood near the head table, fully aware that dozens of eyes were watching my every move. 90 minutes. 90 minutes of waiting while Blaine had arranged my soup. Then, he emerged from the kitchen area. He was carrying an industrial garbage bucket, the kind used for food scraps and kitchen waste. It was gray plastic, stained and dented, filled with contents I could smell from 20 feet away. His walk was measured and theatrical, designed for maximum impact. The conversations around us began to die as guests noticed his strange prop. "Soup's ready," he announced, his voice carrying across the tent. A chill ran through the crowd. People stopped mid-sentence, their forks suspended halfway to their mouths. The string quartet played on, oblivious to the unfolding drama. Blaine approached me with deliberate steps, with the bucket swinging slightly in his grip. His eyes were bright with malicious joy, like a child about to pull the wings off a butterfly. He said, "Here's your soup, you pathetic beggar." Time froze. I saw everything at once. Chloe's face was drained of color. Vance was half rising from his chair, and Maris's hand flew to her mouth. The photographer's camera clicked instinctively, and 20 phones appeared as if by magic. The bucket's contents hit me like a cold, putrid wave. Food scraps, grease, coffee grounds, and vegetable peelings soaked through my suit and ran down my face in streams of brown liquid. The smell was overwhelming. Rotten vegetables and spoiled cream mixed with the metallic tang of humiliation. But I didn't move. I stood there, with garbage dripping from my hair, and looked directly into Blaine's eyes. He was breathing hard, his face flushed with the excitement of his performance, waiting for me to break, to cry, or to run away in shame. Instead, I reached up and calmly wiped a coffee ground from my cheek. "Well," I said quietly, with my voice carrying in the absolute silence, "now everyone can see who you really are." The words hit him like a physical blow. His triumphant expression flickered, with uncertainty creeping around the edges. "Blaine!" Chloe's scream cut through the air like a knife. She was on her feet, with her wedding dress forgotten, pushing through guests to reach me. "Have you lost your mind? Someone call security," an elderly guest shouted. "This is our daughter-in-law's father," Maris wailed, her social mortification complete. Vance grabbed his son's arm, saying, "What have you done?" But the chaos was just beginning. At the back of the crowd, an older man in an expensive suit was pointing at me, with his mouth open in recognition. His phone was already in his hand, and his face showed the exact moment of realization. "Oh my," he started to say, then his voice was lost in the crowd's roar, but his finger stayed pointed directly at me. I knew my time as a poor man was about to end. The silence stretched for exactly 5 seconds, just long enough for me to wipe a piece of lettuce from my cheek and meet Blaine's triumphant stare. He was breathing hard, his face flushed with the excitement of his performance, waiting for me to crumble. Then, someone in the crowd gasped, wait a minute." The older man in the expensive suit was squinting at me with his phone already in his hand. "That's John Whitaker." "Who?" asked the woman beside him. His voice rose with certainty. "The renewable energy billionaire, NextGen Renewables. He's on the Forbes list." The crowd erupted. Phones appeared like magic, and guests frantically Googled my name. The whispers started as murmurs and grew to a roar. "That's a billion-dollar company. He drives a Tesla, not that Honda. Look, here's his photo in Fortune magazine." Blaine's face drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, with no sound coming out. The bucket slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the ground. "No," he whispered, then louder, "No, that's impossible. He drives an old car. He asked for soup. He's poor." I stepped closer to him, with garbage still dripping from my hair. "Did you enjoy your little performance, Blaine?" His knees buckled slightly, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool weather. "Mr. Whitaker, sir, I had no idea. Please, take my jacket." He was frantically removing his expensive suit jacket, trying to clean the filth from my clothes with his own hands. The gesture was pathetic, a desperate attempt to undo the undoable. "The time for courtesy has passed," I said quietly. The crowd had shifted completely. Guests who had ignored me an hour ago now stared at Blaine with revulsion. His groomsmen backed away as if his humiliation might be contagious. Even his parents looked mortified. "Please," Blaine's voice cracked. "I'll do anything. Name your price. I'll buy you a new car, a new house, anything. Some lessons can't be bought, son." I pulled out my phone with deliberate calm. "This has been thoroughly documented. Video from multiple angles. My attorneys will contact you Monday morning. Please, I'll give you everything I have." The photographer who had been capturing the wedding was now focused entirely on our exchange. Security guards had appeared at the edges of the crowd, though whether to protect me or to remove Blaine wasn't clear. Wedding guests pressed closer, with their phones recording everything. The viral nature of the moment was not lost on anyone. By tonight, this would be everywhere. Vance Harrove pushed through the crowd, his face ashen. "Son, what have you done?" Maris followed, her mascara streaming down her cheeks. "This is our daughter-in-law's father." But Blaine was beyond their reach now, still on his knees, still trying to clean garbage from my shoes with his bare hands. The man who had humiliated me minutes ago had been reduced to groveling in front of 100 witnesses. I scanned the crowd for Chloe, but didn't see her among the chaos. A bridesmaid pointed toward the garden entrance when I caught her eye. The crowd was getting louder and more agitated. Someone mentioned calling the police. Others were already posting videos online. The whole thing was spiraling beyond anyone's control. I had what I came for. Blaine had revealed his true character to everyone who mattered. It was time to find my daughter. The stone pathway wound through Victorian rose gardens. Each step took me farther from the chaos behind me. I could still hear Blaine's voice calling my name, growing fainter with distance. Good. Fountain water trickled somewhere ahead, masking the sound of my footsteps on gravel. I picked the last bits of coffee grounds from my hair and straightened my ruined tie. The garbage smell would take days to wash out, but that seemed unimportant now. Then I heard her crying. Chloe sat on a wrought iron bench, facing away from the reception. Her wedding dress was spread around her like spilled cream. Her shoulders shook with sobs, her veil was askew, and her bouquet was abandoned on the ground beside her feet. I cleared my throat gently. She turned, and I saw her face. Her makeup was streaked with tears, and her eyes were red and swollen. When she recognized me, fresh tears spilled over. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I should have listened." I opened my arms, and she collapsed into them, not caring about the stains on my suit. Her whole body trembled against my chest. "Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for." But I defended him. "I chose him over you. You chose love. That's what I raised you to do." She pulled back to look at me, searching my face. "Why didn't you tell me about the money? All this time, you own one of the biggest companies in California. I needed to know if he loved you or the idea of you." I brushed a tear from her cheek. I needed to know who he really was when he thought no one important was watching. "You've been testing him this whole time. I've been protecting you the only way I knew how." New tears came, but these seemed different, somehow cleaner. "How can you forgive me after what I said in that parking lot? After I accused you of being jealous and controlling? Because you're my daughter, and I love you more than my pride. I feel so stupid. You feel human. That's what makes you beautiful." We sat together on the bench, with her wedding dress billowing around us like a cloud. In the distance, I could hear sirens. Someone had called the police after all. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home. We figure out the legal mess. We heal. I don't know how to face people. Everyone's going to know what happened, what I married. You married someone who hid his true nature very well. That's not your fault." She was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "I want to come back to California. I can't stay here anymore. Your room is exactly the way you left it. And work? I'll need to find something. There's always a place for you at NextGen if you want it. No nepotism, no special treatment. You'd earn your position." She leaned against my shoulder. "I missed you, Dad. I missed us. I missed us too." The sirens were getting closer. Soon, this place would be crawling with police and reporters. We needed to leave before the circus got worse. Ready to go home? She nodded, then stood and smoothed her dress. Will you help me out of this thing first? I never want to see it again. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. I think we can arrange that. We walked together toward the parking area, with her hand tucked into my arm. Behind us, the sound of her ruined reception grew louder. Ahead of us lay whatever came next. At the parking area, Chloe stopped short. Dad, is that your Tesla? The Model S sat 20 feet away, with a company parking pass visible on the dashboard. Next to it, my rental Honda Civic looked even more pathetic than before. One of them, I admitted. I have a few cars. She shook her head, half laughing, half crying. The whole performance. You really committed to the bit. Had to be convincing. I opened the Honda's passenger door. One more ride in character. Why not the Tesla? This car has been part of the story. It seems wrong to abandon it now. As we drove away from Willow Grove Estate, I could see the chaos in my rearview mirror. Police cars and news vans were already arriving, and wedding guests were streaming toward their vehicles. Blaine was probably still on his knees in that tent. Chloe's phone buzzed constantly. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. Dad, this is everywhere online already. Someone posted the video, and it has 50,000 views. Good. Let the world see who he really is. The comments. People are calling you a hero. They're saying Blaine got what he deserved. What do you think? She was quiet for a moment, scrolling through responses. I think justice looks different than I expected. My own phone rang. My attorney, right on schedule. Mr. Whitaker, I've seen the videos. Clear grounds for assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Put it on speaker, Chloe said. I want to hear this. We have multiple witnesses, video evidence from several angles, and a clear pattern of premeditated humiliation, the lawyer continued. This is winnable. I want consequences, not destruction, I said carefully. A measured response. Understood. Civil suit for damages, public apology, community service. Nothing that ruins his life permanently, but enough to ensure he thinks twice before treating anyone this way again. Chloe leaned toward the phone. What about the marriage? Can I get an annulment? Absolutely. Fraud, misrepresentation of character, emotional abuse. We'll have papers filed by Wednesday. I just want it to be over, she said quietly. It will be, I promised. On our terms. The highway stretched ahead, with city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. Chloe had changed out of her wedding dress in the estate's bathroom and was now wearing jeans and a simple blouse I'd grabbed from her honeymoon luggage. I can't believe I was so blind, she said. You saw the best in someone. That's not blindness. How do I trust my judgment again? By remembering that love requires wisdom, not just feeling. By understanding that character reveals itself under pressure, not just in good times. My phone showed 17 missed calls from reporters. I turned it off. Will you come back to work at EcoThrive? I asked. Actually, she paused, considering what I had said about NextGen. Did you mean it about earning my position? Every word. Then yes, I want to learn the business. I want to understand what you built, what I'm inheriting someday. It's not just money, you know. It's responsibility to employees, to the environment, to the future. I'm ready to learn. The GPS indicated 2 hours to San Francisco International Airport. We would catch the red-eye to Los Angeles, then drive up the coast to home. By tomorrow morning, this would all feel like a very expensive nightmare. Dad, she said. Yes. Thank you for protecting me, for testing him, for loving me enough to risk everything. That's what fathers do. Even billionaire fathers who pretend to be poor. Especially those. We drove in comfortable silence, leaving the wreckage of her wedding day behind us. Ahead lay home, healing, and whatever came next. The test was over. My daughter was coming home. That was worth any price.